Hey, everybody, welcome to the Mend Podcast. It's your host, Joe Roeder, with another ad-free angling experience. This is going to be an installment of what we call Tuesday's Tippets. We don't get to it every Tuesday, but about every other Tuesday, it'll be kind of largely trout tactics. We're getting out of the saltwater thing. So I am really excited to have one of my longtime best pals, and I actually consider him a bit of a fly fishing mentor as well. My old buddy Josh Potter on the podcast today. We went fishing that we mentioned on the last podcast. We just touched on it a little bit, but here we are. Josh, welcome to the Men Podcast.
Happy to be here.
Hey, even though we're like best pals, you said you actually have listened to the podcast before.
I listen to it all the time. It's awesome.
You're one of the first. Yeah, you're one of the first guys on the podcast that's actually listened to the podcast.
No kidding.
Yeah, they're all like, "Oh, you guys have a podcast?" I'm like, yeah, we got a podcast, man.
Yeah, man, I enjoy it. Yeah, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, but I really I love listening to your podcast. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, we try to keep it real, man. That was fun. So, give us kind of a summary of the trip that we reenacted. We kind of reenacted a trip from a long time ago last week. But kind of summarize what we kind of did we relived our past a little bit.
Yeah, we did. Well, it was perfect conditions. So 38 degrees, raining sideways. The creek was way lower than I would have anticipated for that time of year, and gin clear with chin high dead grass. And most of the time the water was 6 to 8 feet below our feet. So, I mean, it's perfect. Yeah. It was super easy.
Very easy fishing.
Yeah.
What I was getting at is you and I, it was like 26 years ago, did the first day we ever went fishing together was in that same creek, that same section, like a little less than 26 years ago.
Exact opposite conditions.
Yeah.
We were there in mid-April, and at that time, the landowner who gives me access was still allowing his cows on the creek. And so there was no chin high grass. Grass was like boot high. Water was warmer, a lot higher, and a little off color. And it was, if you can get your flies to the water, you are going to catch fish type fishing. That's how it used to be down there.
Yeah, it was fun kind of redoing that. And I mentioned this on the last podcast, but that was the first time you and I had ever fished together.
Yeah.
And then I did another similar trip last year with my buddy Chad. It would have been 28 years since the first time we'd fished together, and we went and refished the same exact trip, which was really cool.
The first trip was a scene from Step Brothers where they write, "Did we just become best friends?" Yes.
Yep. Yeah, it was literally what happened.
We smashed them that day.
Yeah, it was crazy. That's interesting so just to kind of, give the listeners background, this is like a wild, unnamed spring creek. It's got a few big browns in it that show up at night from time to time, but that's not what you're there for. We're catching these wild rainbows in a wild spring creek, and they're spooky. They're difficult. The obstacles we're up against are, there's a lot of slow sections that are very technical and very difficult to fish that require a lot of stealth. There's a few fast buckets, but in those spots, the fish are often tucked under the overhanging grass or under the brush. It's a challenge, man. It was humbling. I forgot how technical and challenging some of those little wild spring creeks are.
Well, and it had been a little over 10 years since I had been there last. And so it had changed quite a bit. Yeah, it changed. And I'd never really fished it this time of year. I had 2 periods of time when I would fish that creek for a long time. It was always dead of winter. And then I always use sort of the NCAA tournament as kind of the time frame of, first week of April, post spawn. Fish are very, very snappy, very competitive, heavy, looking to feed in the fast, riffly water. Yeah, actually used to back, 20 years ago, I would take guys there who had not fly fished much before, which I would not do that now because the time of the year and the way things set up, I always felt like it was a good opportunity for people to catch fish. I would not say when we went and the way the creek has changed and the practices of the keeping the cows off the creek, which is awesome for the fish, but it really has changed it dramatically. I was texting with some old buddies who I cut my teeth with on that creek, 25 years ago, saying, "Hey, man, that stretch is the deep end of the pool now."
Oh, really?
Yeah, yeah. Big Fish Brad. I was texting with Big Fish Brad last night, actually saying, "Hey, you wouldn't recognize that stretch now compared to what it was like the last time he was there."
Yeah, that's incredible. Before we get into like a lot of the technical talk, like, give us your angling background. Like you and I were fly fishing together, 25 years ago, and then, where do you live? Where do you normally fish? Like, I want to talk about your professional bass fishing sabbatical, which wasn't sure we'd ever get you back from that. But yeah, give us a little background. Who are you?
Well, I started fly fishing not super super young, but fairly young. My family's all from the Paradise Valley area, in Livingston actually, and so I kind of always had the romantic idea about fly fishing. And then I think the first time I actually started fly fishing, I was probably about 16 or 17 years old, and then I have one speed, kind of all pedal, no gas with whatever I'm doing. And so in a 5 or 6 year period of time, I got myself pretty deep into the fly fishing deal. And that's about the time you and I met. I think it's funny that you say that one of your fly fishing mentors. I think you were definitely as good or better of a fisherman as I was at the time that we met, but that's very flattering that you say that. And I stayed in that world for, I don't know, probably 15 years. And then I got introduced to tournament bass fishing, and it kind of smacked me in the face for about a decade. And that's I kind of I would come back to fly fishing from time to time. There was always guys like yourself, a few select individuals they would call me and say, "Hey, I want to go do this," and I'd go grab the long rod and you know get back into it. But when we moved our family to North Idaho in 2021, and I had already kind of been out of the bass fishing world for a couple of years. When I got to Coeur d'Alene, I was like, I just like fell right back in love with why I love fly fishing. I've always said I think bass are one of the funnest fish to catch in the grossest places there are. And I think the thing I love about fly fishing, it takes you to the most magnificent settings. And as I've gotten older, I appreciate the settings and the places that fly fishing takes you much more than, not that trout aren't awesome. I love them. I think they're amazing. And I love bugs. I think waterborne bugs are one of the coolest things. I love photographing them. I like everything about bugs. But that's, I'm back firmly in the fly fishing world, though I will never leave.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of catch and smacking bass and ugly places, we took your bass boat uh, about that at least a couple times. We went out to Moses Lake and
Yeah.
yeah, we threw flies up under the docks along the weed edges. Dude,
Yeah.
Joyce smash. I still remember that. That was a long time ago, but he smashed like
Yeah.
a 5 pounder on a popper off the deck of the
Oh,
bass boat.
that was
Um,
so awesome.
dude, that was a fun day. I
Yeah. I think I took Steve and his uncle and a guy out and fished for spawning smallmouth on that same body of water a couple years later.
Yeah, no, I do. Bass are great, man. But you're right about trout. Like, I summarize it like this: like, trout generally live in places that I would travel to otherwise, regardless of fly fishing. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I'm going to be at the foot of the mountains. They generally live in ecosystems that are cold, cold cleanup here. And
They live in the same places that I would elk hunt and bear hunt.
yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Speaking of which, like, we promise we're not going to talk about bear hunting on the podcast, but yeah, where I'm going. But yeah, so yeah, tell us where you're spending most of your time trout fishing these days.
I spend most of my time in the North Fork. of the Coeur d'Alene and the St. Joe drainage in large part. I would say for the most part, because I live in Coeur d'Alene, bouncing over the Fernan Saddle and into the Little North Fork or the Upper North Fork, just all that freestone cutthroat water is, where I spend most of my time now. My son was living in Helena for 4 years while he was going to school and playing football. So I bounced over and fished to Missouri with him and some little obscure creeks that he discovered in his off time. But I would say, my home water is anything roadless in the North Idaho area. And drift boat, I've done, I don't know, not a lot, but maybe 25 or 30 guide trips for a local outfitter in Coeur d'Alene over the last few years.
This may require a separate podcast, but like, in talking about, why we chase, wild trout in wild places and it's kind of the romance of that. Tell tell me, because this is like you've told me all about this and I've seen the photographs and some video clips of this little documentary
Mm.
that you've put together with your son Keel. But tell us a little bit about that experience you had in the roadless section that you guys did and kind of how that went down. Again, maybe we'll do a separate podcast on that at some point, but what a unique experience that was.
Man, it's still, I daydream about that trip on probably a weekly basis. There's a largely roadless section of the upper end of the North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River, and I'd fished 1 or 2 3 mile sections of it over the course of a couple of years while I was poking around up there. Actually, I went up there a long, long time ago, like in the late 1900s, with a friend of mine, and I fished it a couple summers ago, the first few miles where the river leaves the road, and I was looking at Onyx one day, and I was telling my son, I was like, "Hey, man, I'd really like to do is I'd like to parlay sort of this spring bear backpack hunting, kind of backpack expedition style adventure into a fishing trip. And I think I've found a pretty cool place to do it. And I'd asked some old timers around the fly shop in Coeur d'Alene if they'd ever, contemplated this idea. And I wasn't exactly sure how to plan it out logistically, but I thought about it for about a year and a half. And finally he came around and I was like, "Hey, we're gonna do this, and we're gonna start here, and we're gonna go put a rig at the end." And it was, I think it ended up being a little over 25 miles of river, and we waded and fished. So we didn't get out and like walk sections of a trail and come back down and fish. Like, we entered the river where the river comes to the blacktop, and we entered the river and we waded the entire 25 miles of that all the way up to its origin, where we were able to, where the road, a Forest Service road, comes down and touches. And yeah, we waded that entire thing. It took us about 5.5 days to do it.
Yeah, yeah, fishing with your camp on your back in river, right?
Camp on our back. Yeah, that was the part that I was worried about. I'd never fished with like a 55-pound pack on my back before, and I wasn't exactly sure how that would go. Within the first couple of miles or so, I found that it really wasn't that bad. I kind of had the idea like we would hole hop, like we'd fish like really selected. Of course, I'd kind of plotted this track out well in advance, and so I dropped pins on all these areas that we were going to fish. And I thought, oh, well, we'll hike, and then we'll get to these areas. We'll drop our packs and we'll fish, and then you get to the river, and all of a sudden, you find yourself fishing and your pack's on your back, and we just kind of did it. So it really wasn't that bad. Of course, every day our packs got 2.5 pounds lighter as we ate through our food. And so by the time we got to the last day, our packs were pretty light, honestly.
Yeah, that sounds like an awesome trip. Yeah, some of the photos from that excursion,
Oh,
pretty remarkable.
yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I knew that took, a lot of planning. We may unwind that in a different discussion, but
Yeah.
yeah, man, let's talk tactical trout, man. So
Yeah.
we hit the creek the other day. As you said, it was 38 degrees and raining. Of course, I forgot my rain jacket because I didn't think it'd be 38 degrees and raining. Uh, it let up, but man, it blew pretty good, which made things a little bit more challenging, especially, you know, I started out that day, I grabbed one rod and I was going to be, as you know, I really like Euro nymphing or tightline nymphing. I almost despise the term Euro nymphing because I feel like there's a stigma associated with that. Like
Yeah.
tightline nymphing is the productivity of fishing nymphs with the tightline grabs and the tugs of streamer fishing on an ultralight
Yes.
rod. Like the challenge is like, man, I've talked about this podcast in the past. Like, it's really hard to get people that have fished a long time into it. And generally, people try it just enough to hate it. And they don't really want to relearn something. For me, once I saw how effective it was, I was interested. Once I experienced how fun and rewarding and then the control that you had, I just went head over heels. Man, I mean, that's generally plan A for me is I'm going to tight line nymph. But in that wind that we were having, in the situation that we were in, I realized pretty quickly we had to kind of throw some longer casts upstream, and then we kind of had to hold drifts and some of that slower water. And you couldn't really, it seemed like the fish that were in the pools were probably really spooky because some of that water we fished that was in the pools, we could get them stripping streamers across it, but I couldn't get them like trying to tight line nymph it. It was just not enough current.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I was actually disappointed in that because when you had called and said, "Hey, let's fish the creek," all I could think about was because I've been listening to your podcast and I realized how archaic some of my fishing styles are, and I've been stuck in a rut. And it's not that I'm opposed to learning new things. I just haven't seen it. And I had told my son actually early in the week, I'm like, I cannot wait to fish with Joe on Wednesday because I'm going to milk him for everything he's got as it pertains to these new techniques that I see all the time. But I just, for whatever reason, I'm a little short on time. I'm not a professional fisherman. I don't have time to go out and fart around. And I don't mind spending a day or 2 days learning something new, but I just hadn't seen it before. And I'm a lot better if I can watch somebody do it. So I was a little bit bummed the conditions ended up being the way because I had fully intended on watching you just smash fish out of holes that I couldn't catch. And then I was going to steal your rod and try to replicate what you were doing.
Kind of and
That was my whole plan.
well, I took some of the clips that we shot. We shot some GoPro, or DJI footage that day. Just the head cam type. Well, we didn't use head cam, but we'll just say GoPro for lack of a better term. But we shot some GoPro footage that day. But the wind was so awful; it was just blowing out the mics, and it really wasn't usable in a format other than a few examples. But like let's just run through the day, I guess. Like
Yeah.
you started with your Oros and a double nymph rig, and you walked down, and what happened?
Will got just, first couple of drifts got smashed by really eager fish. But even when I walked up to the water, I was like, oh, this is not ideal. I'm going to throw a cannonball in there. I really figured that what we would see was higher, less visible water. Like a foot of visibility on that creek is like the ideal situation where you can just walk right up, stand on top of the hole, drift through and catch fish. And when we got there and I saw that, I was like, oh, this isn't great. I remember cringing the first couple of times my large ball, and I wasn't fishing a big one. I was fishing the smallest Oros they make. But I mean, they were snappy fish in that first. But yeah, it was pretty obvious that wasn't going to be the ticket that day.
Yeah, so Josh throws the Oros in there, a couple of nymphs. You hook 3 fish, boom, boom, boom.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, we're gonna slaughter these things. And then it was just the pool had obviously the force had been disturbed,
For sure.
and I started out with my Hardy Ultralight LL 499. I love that rod because on that creek, and I think this is true for a lot of listeners, like it would be the concept of like having like a rod holder and snapping a rod into a rod holder and switching between like a dry, like let's say a delicate nymph rig, like a dry dropper, and then maybe a streamer or something heavier is great. But in that grass and brush, dragging a second rod around on your hip would be a nightmare. like
Ugh.
that second rod would be tangled and everything. It would be a distraction. So I wanted to take one rod with me. And I started out tightline nymphing and then realized really quickly, I'm like, yeah, we can't walk up to the creek, because it's gin clear, which,
Mhm.
as you said, like, a little higher flow, a little dirtier water would have been an advantage to the angler. And it was so windy and we had to throw from further back. Pretty quickly, I realized, okay, like this micro leader system with a Perdigon style nymph is not going to be the ticket because I'm getting so much wind push and wind sway in that leader that the nymph is moving when it's not supposed to. And wind sway is bad because it's not like it's agitating the nymph and like making it look real. It's literally just making it look phony because it's on a constant drag, constant tension. So I switched up and I don't know if you remember this, but I went from like a conventional Euro nymphing leader that was super long, very hard to handle on longer casts, and I cut that off. And what I like to do is run like a 7.5 foot 3X leader on my regular floating fly line, regular 4-weight floating, real gold fly line, nothing fancy. But then I tied a 2 foot chunk of yellow cider material on there and I put a little streamer on. And
Yep.
I did end up, the advantage to that is when there was a couple of those fast little corners that I was able to slide a little jig leech, which could be a crayfish, it could be a leech, it could be a minnow, it could be a dragonfly nymph, a grub, it could be any bug that has a little bit of ability to move within the river itself or move within the current. So I could dead stick and tightline those through the swifter spots, which works with a heavy bug, even with a little bit of wind sway. And then in the slower pools, rather than being relegated to just trying to imitate a nymph drift, I was able to take like a naughty hooker fly or a leech or a soccer bomb, whatever, a little swimming bug. And I was able to throw because I was using the conventional fly line across the pool. So basically that rig was like I had a I had a 7.5 foot 3X leader, just your standard leader, 2 feet of cider, and then about 4 feet of tippet. So I had a pretty long leader, was still like 12 plus feet, whatever the math works out to. It was still a fairly long leader. But then I could blast that thing across the pools. And I did catch a couple of fish and I hooked that big one, the bigger brown, and just snapped. I mean, that thing broke me off like
Yeah.
instantly. I mean, I saw the fish eat and busted it off, but I was able to work the big pools like by stripping a fly, and then I was able to tight line nymph and pick apart some of that swifter stuff around the brush more in like a dead stick fashion in the because there's certain water that's too tight, you can't strip a streamer. It's just the streamer
Mhm.
goes in and it's at the mercy of the you're going to float it under cut banks and stuff like that.
Mm.
But I don't know. Did you think it was odd when I had that yellow cider and was just casting it across the pools, and then that piece of cider was just being stripped across the pool?
Yeah, there's nothing that is normal about fishing those little waters. You think they're small, and so everything's going to be tight and intimate. And what I've found, honestly, is that a lot of times you have to make long casts.
Yep.
Like, I mean, it seems so anti-intuitive because you're fishing this ditch and you're like, oh, I can walk in. No, man, to get the egg because of the way the creek lays out and the steepness of the banks and all that stuff. Like, it is some of the longest, most technical casting I think that you'll ever find. Well, not ever, but it's shocking. It's surprising.
Yeah.
Um,
So what we haven't really described the body of water very well, and I think there's a lot of these backyard creeks in prairies all over the country.
mhm.
This place it's special to us. It might not be special to other people if you were to come visit us, but because it's lesser known, it's unique. Not a lot of people know about it. I'm not going to say the name of it with respect to other anglers that fish there, but I'm not going to hype it up and tell you like it's so incredible. Blah blah blah. It's cool.
No,
It's cool
yeah,
because it's ours, right? Like it's a bass
yeah,
fishery.
that's the only reason it's awesome. Yeah.
Exactly. But yeah, it's a ditch in places and it gets really wide and then the banks are really high above you. So you might be standing at times 4 or 5 feet above the water. And to net a fish, you got to drop down on your butt with your feet in the water because it's deep and then net a fish, through the tall grass. But what I was doing is I was casting that cider material as part of my tapered leader in my setup. And that cider material helps me control my streamer when I'm dead sticking it in the swifter parts and the technical corners where there's no room to strip a streamer, but then you might walk downstream 40 feet and now you've got a big billowy pool, and now I've got to cast all the way to the other side, and you have to have a conventional fly line to make those casts because we're going to propel it to distance. But I've streamer fished with that bright cider material in my leader a ton, and I have not found that to put fish off at all. People, like my streamer's about 4 feet behind that cider material, but I've had I have no hesitation about just casting, a tightline rig with a chunk of cider in it, which helps. It's an indicator for me to gauge the behavior of the fly in the swift water. I can measure depth to the bottom, detect strikes, and so on. But when I get in those big pools, I just cast my conventional tightline nymphing rig out with a TJ hooker or a knotty hooker or a leech or whatever, and then I just strip it back across. So I pretty quickly changed from like a technical tightline Euro nymphing rig to like a tightline streamer fishing rig pretty early in the day, and that was a good adjustment. I did get a couple of fish early in the day doing that, and then
Yeah.
we fished upstream, and then I was like, man, I go, Josh, you got to try this New Zealand thing. So we ended up hiking all the way back to the truck.
Which was awesome.
Yeah. So so that was the first time you'd actually, I mean, obviously
Yeah.
you're a part-time guide, you're super pro angler, but that was the first time you'd rigged up using that kit. What'd you think of that New Zealand strike indicator tool kit?
Oh, it was so awesome. There were so many things I really enjoyed about it. One, the castability of it is amazing. It feels like you're casting a dry fly. Secondarily, it took me a little while to get used to how sensitive that material is. I used to, a long time ago, I used to fish with that same type of material, just, tied into a leader like an overhand knot, right? But the thing I really didn't like about it is you're very pigeonholed as to what depth, and which is fine on big rivers, but in a creek like that where you're going to go from fishing a slot that's 2.5 feet deep to maybe one that's 6 feet deep. That wasn't practical for adjusting. And what I really loved about that New Zealand deal was the fact that you could move it up and down, and it didn't put a kink in your leader. It didn't impact your leader. And I loved, after I got used to, I think I set the hook on several times on just movement in that leader because it was so sensitive that once I got accustomed to it, yeah, it's hard for me to imagine going back. Like, I will probably, even on the big, dumb cutthroat rivers that I fish, I do still fish nymphs quite a bit because there's periods of time where they're just not going to charge up and eat a foam fly, despite what everybody thinks. It's hard for me to imagine going back to fishing, a thingamabobber or Oros again now that I've been exposed to that.
Yeah,
That
I mean, there's a
New
reason
Zealand.
that is the only, New Zealand. And in fact, the fishery, the way we were fishing the creek the other day, now certainly there are some giant trout in this creek, but we're not there I'm frankly not there for the giant trout. I'm there for
Nope.
rainbows in the 10 to 16 inch range. Like, that's my game. I love just trouting. There's a reason that's the only indicator that they use there. So like the fishery we were in, that indicator system, it's delicate, it's sharp. You're right about the casting accuracy. Now we can throw a 40-foot cast, on a razor, we can split grass, we can split wickets and control it. But I don't think maybe you'd watch some videos or something, but you'd never actually seen one built with that tool before, had you?
No, no, nope, nope.
Nope.
I've only seen it in application. I've never seen it. I've never seen it put together.
Yeah. And so like, the first time I watched like a video of it, I was like, that guy made it look way too easy. There's no possible way.
It is actually that easy. A moron like myself could do that. Yeah.
Yeah, so we put, and you can customize the size of the indicator, right? Like you can just run. I like the little spools of this synthetic yarn. Oh, and for anybody listening to the podcast, if you don't follow the YouTube channel, this podcast will come out before the video, but in a week or so, we'll have a full video that kind of talks about some of these things that are mentioned. So just kind of keep your eyes peeled there. But those spools of synthetic yarn that the Strike Indicator Company makes are absolutely excellent. They're super buoyant. You still want to run a comb through them and put a little floating on them, but you can scale them to the size because we were just running a solo, like little number 16, mayfly varietals under that. And yeah, for that, you just can run one little strand. So you don't need a big indicator to hold up, a very small nymph like that. But I think you still need an indicator. I don't know, there's a contingency of people that are like, no bobbers, I'm anti-bobber. I'm like, whatever.
Whatever.
There-
Yeah.
It's like there are times we got to throw 40 or 50 feet, like a long cast upstream, because that's the only place you can access the creek and make the shot. Like there's some long casts, and you can throw that indicator just up there on a rope, man, and then let it hunt the part of the way back down or fish it a long ways across from you. I really enjoy that yarn fishing. I like the delicate nature of it.
I think if I were to take that same setup, double the amount of material that you put in mine that day, and were to fish the type of winter holding water that I typically fish, like in December, January, and February on the cutthroat streams that I fish, because these fish winter in slow, deeper holes. If I were to employ that same tactic that we fished the other day, a month ago or 2 months ago with my buddies that I was floating the Coeur d'Alene with, I think I would have increased my fish catch by 25 to 30%.
Oh, you're right, because in slow currents, like the sensitivity of the
Oh,
indicator becomes more paramount because the takes are really delicate in the wintertime. And that fish can pick that nymph up, chew on it, spit it out before, a larger conventional indicator is even going to twitch. Whereas that yarn, you're going to see it hesitate, you're going to see it dunk, dodge, dip, whatever. And yeah, in slow currents, especially, yarn becomes even more critical. So yeah, it was fun, launching that New Zealand rig on you the other day. I just think it's one of those things that's really easy not to employ because, again, watch the video of the guy who works at the frigging company, and you're like, there's no way that's that easy. But you're right. Even a moron like you can do it.
I think it's possible.
It's possible. So we went and rigged up. We made these nice, tidy New Zealand indicator rigs, back in the truck. And then we're like, okay. So then Josh was like, hey, we're going to hike like a mile downstream. So we hike, 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 hike. And we went down to this beautiful hole on the corner. There's a big 90-degree bend with a bunch of swirls and a big flat. And then, of course, we set our rigs up, and then we got down there. And then what did we see down at the corner?
Big giant heads popping up, sipping blowing olives.
Yeah, of course. Now we're all rigged up.
Which was awesome to see, but yeah, quickly scrambling to make an adjustment.
So maybe we should have hiked down there first and then re-rig. So
And I fished that hole. When I say this, it'll sound hyperbole, but I fished that hole hundreds of times. And as sexy as it is when you see it, it's the biggest, most wide open expanse that there is on the entire section of creek, and it is the most challenging piece of water there is to catch fish on that entire creek.
yeah, it's because they can see you, like, and there's not a good angle to approach it. So
There's a terrible angles.
yeah, so when you dry fly fish it, you kind of have to throw like across a big slow slick into really fast current moving at 90 degrees, and you can throw. There's the listeners that are like, oh, just throw a reach cast, just throw a wiggle cast, a downstream men. You're like, yeah, we know all that, right? Those fish were damn hard to catch sipping betas in that hole.
Especially those that were on the other side. So there's slick water, fast water, slick water. And of course, the biggest, most aggressive, the most steady eaters were on the second slick.
In the second slick, the bank is like 8 feet high all the way around with willow trees.
I've tried to go fish that. I started fishing that creek in 1998. I've tried every possible way, every single approach there is, and there is no good approach to those fish.
Yeah, you just got to get one to wander over to your own side there. We threw over them, but the drift, even a stream, you can pitch a streamer across that quick water, and if you get
Hmm.
one, great, but you're not going to get two. You're not
Yeah.
going to get probably more than two casts with a streamer in there before they're like, hey, something's up, man, this is weird. So we dry fly fished a little bit. You got two good eats. Hey, share because of the wind and the mayflies. Share what you experienced on those. You managed to get two good eats from good fish over there. Share what you learned about drag on the fly in the wind.
Oh, drag on the fly with wind is your friend. I don't, I mean, I tried to pile up line, I'd throw a cast over and I'd try to pile line behind in the current and keep it as drag free as possible. The more effort I put into a drag free drift, the less fish I got to eat. The two or three that I got to eat were when I lost track of the fly and it actually started to swing. I think actually one time I said, I've actually had a little bit of luck stripping these back slowly, whack, and then a fish eats it, and I just didn't see it. I missed both of those because I didn't know where my fly was, to be perfectly honest with you.
But yeah, we were watching those betas in the wind, and even the mayflies were getting blown along pretty aggressively. Now
Hmm.
those are the duns; those ones are done emerging, so they're not really attached to the film anymore. But the betas were getting blown around pretty good. And yeah, those times, you said that you go, yeah, and we're just gonna like let it end gracefully and then slow strip it back. Plus, you got to clear the pool before you make your next cast. You can't just rip your fly out of the pool
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I mean, those fish are smart, man. They're very they're very defensive. But yeah, that really allowing your dry fly to end gracefully. Don't give up on it. Don't just strip it out of the pool, but actually work it out of the pool as though it's being fluttered along by the wind or it's trying to take off. It's trying to fly away.
Mm.
But man, sometimes you can't give up on drifts just because they don't meet your standards. The only standards that matter are the trout standards. And we're not sure what those are from fish to fish and moment to moment in each scenario. So yeah, that was fun. We got to dink around with some dry fly fishing.
And these are not pressured fish.
No, they're just smart, man.
Yeah.
They live in an aquarium, man. That water's super clear and it's super small.
How many blue herons did we see?
Zero actually. Yeah.
Yeah, well, we saw one when we first pulled up, right?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
Down
You
the field,
pretended.
right?
Yeah. No, I remember you threw your fly rod up like a shotgun, like you were going to shoot the blue heron. I
Yeah.
do.
Oh, I took some photographs of it with. So those fish, despite not being fished to, at least in the section that we were fishing, they're constantly pestered by blue herons. There are osprey, and there was no shortage of otter poop.
Oh, dude, there was otters. Yeah, we didn't see them, but man, their otter sign and their little tracks and trails were freaking everywhere in that creek.
So there was no sign of human traffic anywhere along that section of creek. But those fish, like elk in the wilderness, they may not be being hunted by humans, but they are always being hunted.
No, you're absolutely right. Those otters were friggin' everywhere. And yeah, I do remember. Yeah, I was joking about you shooting, pretending to shoot the heron.
I was pretending to shoot those buffleheads that flew over.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, yeah. The heron, you did take some photographs of the heron. That's right,
Yeah.
with a big camera.
Yeah.
But yeah, so then we then after that we threw the New Zealand rigs back on, and then that was our most efficient system of high sticking over tall grass when we had high banks and we couldn't get in, and then we would get in the creek and then we would rifle 30 to 40 foot shots upstream that would come right back at us, which is a very difficult scenario with like a tightline nymphing rig or streamer rig or anything. Sometimes you do have to throw a dead drifted fly straight upstream. And you did catch a nice rainbow, and you were in river, and you let your nymph. You had to get it just right, but you let your nymph kind of wash up under the cut bank.
My best tactic of the day was, rather than avoid the grass, was to throw my flies up in the grass and then finesse them out of the grass onto the water and then let the current do what it wanted to do with the bugs. And that was my best tactic of the day.
Yeah, and I thought you were gonna, say you employed the weed whacker strategy where you just,
I did a little bit of that too.
yeah, the weed whacker strategy did work out once for you. I did notice that, but we did find, and we were kind of joking about this at first, but I think there was some truth to it. The smaller the fly, the less it would actually stick in the grass.
Definitely.
Yeah, so like we got down to like number 16s, maybe even an 18 with a jig head tungsten bead on it, just so that it could actually, it wouldn't just flop around in the current helter skelter, but it actually would track a little bit. But the smaller flies, yeah, the smaller fly you had, it seemed like, you could actually land it in the grass. There's sincerity in that technique of just, yeah, just going to nick the grass, coax it in, and that's the only way I'm going to get that nymph to wash up under those cut banks where those trout are residing, kind of in those little bedding areas, as I like to think of them, like bedding areas for trout. Like when they're out feeding, they're out in the open, but when they're bedded down, man, they're up under those cut banks. They're damn hard to dig out of there.
I think some of what we were dealing with too was probably some fish that we didn't have good conditions for being able to see. Like it was not high sun, low wind. It was high wind, no sun. I I I think some of what we were dealing with, there was probably some fish that were starting to spawn, and so they were not aggressive. So getting those flies in those areas that are a little harder to access was pretty important.
Well, I got to tell you, we caught enough trout to be just super satisfied, but
Oh,
there was no free launch. But man, if that creek were like a whole lot better, because there's public access, in various places, and there's lots of these types of creeks around. Again, these are just backyard fisheries, but if it were if it were much better, it'd be popular. You know, like,
would be popular.
yeah, there's like,
Yeah.
I'm not gonna I'm not gonna bullshit you, man. Like there's a smug satisfaction of going out to these little hidey hole backyard fisheries that are your fisheries. You love them because they're yours, and they're hard as hell, but you like them because there's nobody out there, and there's nobody out there. There's nobody trying to lease this property up to, start an outfitting service. I'm certainly not. It's too hard. I would have a really tough time trying to guide anybody there. But for just, we were just young schmucks. Now we're just old schmucks, but young, we're just young schmucks when we started fishing out there. And I think I said a little quote like, I caught a 12-inch rainbow, and I was like, this might as well be the biggest trout in the world right now at this very moment. Like, super satisfying. When you make a good cast, you make a good
Hmm.
plan, you do it right, and it all comes together.
I have taken people there in the past and been offended with their reaction. Like when you say these are our fisheries, I'm like, yeah, you're doggone right. And if I take you there and you don't think it's as awesome as I do, I'm not taking you back.
Oh, dude, that's like somebody hitting your dog. I mean, like,
Exactly.
yeah,
Or,
like,
or or you cook them a steak and they put ketchup on it. It's like, no, that's offensive.
like yeah, man. Yeah,
I
yeah.
just gave you a piece of backstrap and you doused it in ketchup. Like, you're not coming back here again. We're not friends anymore.
Yeah, if you have to explain why, some of these quirky little backyard fisheries, and I don't care whether it's this creek or any other of the thousands of little bodies of water that, anglers have that are like maybe it's a pond, maybe it's a little creek or a river, particular area or section, and you love it because it's yours and you have memories there. Your heart, maybe your ashes are, maybe some of your ashes are going to go in that place, and then people are like, nah, it was okay.
I'm more than mildly offended.
That's exactly right, man. Yeah, I couldn't put my finger on it, but yeah, you said it best. Hey, so so yeah, just to kind of wrap up, the kind of the outcome of the day. Yeah, so we fished I fished a variety of different kind of leader systems and strategies, and they were all effective for different reasons and different things. And I would rationalize why I would do it, but I would do it all with one rod. And kind of when you kind of get good at making those little adjustments to your rig, it's actually really fast. It's not a big deal. And then you can use one reel and one rod. you can leave the rig in the morning with one reel and one rod, and you can do a lot of different things with it for different
Yeah.
types of water. But yeah, we ended the day. I ended up going back just to a streamer and ended up catching a decent rainbow, on that last cast of the day, which was
Yeah.
a pretty good way to hit it and quit it. And then, yeah, I remember I told you, I go, yeah, it's like 5:30, and you're like, what time is it? I guess like 5:30. Yeah, you thought it was like what, like 3 o'clock?
hmm I didn't want to go. I hadn't been there in a long time, and I was having so much fun being with you, doing what we had done so many years ago. I just didn't want it to end. I probably would have fished till dark, despite the fact that I don't think we would have been any more productive had we stayed there another 3 or 4 hours. But it was just one of the, it's just one of those deals.
Yeah, so it's yeah, super day. I encourage anybody listening, like find those quirky little fisheries. I guarantee you've got some near your house. You know, I've been appalled, and man, you did a ton of this in Eastern Washington of just checking these little ditches and
Mm.
canals and creeks. And can you remember like one instance where you were just shocked at what you found in?
Oh, 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 yeah, for sure. Actually, about a week ago, I got a photograph texted to me from one of my only childhood friend that is still in my life's mom, where I caught a 20. I was holding this fish back then. If you didn't bring the fish home, it didn't happen, right? So I feel terrible today about having killed this fish, but I caught a 21-inch rainbow out of a out of a creek that was like 3 feet wide.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a trib actually of the, so as small as the creek was that you and I were fishing last week, this was a tributary of that. Imagine how small that is.
Dude, how
Uh,
old are you? Your friend's mom had like an old
yes,
photo.
an actual photograph. I was in eighth grade. It was May of 1988. And I was holding two fish. One was 21 inches and the other one was 15 inches. I caught both of these fish on back to back casts out of the exact same hole. And it was one of those deals where I was like, well, there's got to be fish in here. Look at how awesome this looks. But there was like, there's one good hole. And I don't know how many miles we fished up and down that day. And we came back to the first hole and I caught those two fish. And I was just like, holy smokes. Since that day, I've never driven by a piece of water and not thought to myself, I'll bet there's some big fish in there.
Oh, totally. Yeah, I mean, yeah, yeah, folks listening, there are a lot of blue ribbon rivers and streams, but man, there's a lot of unnamed blue ribbon creeks out there. And man, I think that red ribbon and green ribbon and white ribbon or whatever the heck the placings are for second, third, fourth place, like there's a lot of like lesser known streams out there that you could have half of the fish count but 5 times the productivity just based on the lack of pressure. And
And yeah, and when you pull it, when you hook a fish, when you catch a fish out of one of those places, like it's so satisfying because you think about the number of people who've driven by that and never considered it, and you went and tried it. Now, for every one of those, like that example I gave you, I fished 5 or 6 where I fished all day and never touched a fish. But the only ones I really, really remember are the best ones.
well, those were the days when we didn't have Onyx maps or trout routes or, we didn't have
Yeah,
any of this stuff, man. Like you just kind of drove around. And I can remember, driving on lots of scouting trips only to get out to where there was a creek on my gazetteer map. And you get out there and what would happen? It'd be dry, like literally no
Mhm.
water in it. But then I would hear from somebody else, oh, yeah, you got to go upstream 2 miles. It dewaters. And then you go upstream 2 miles and bam, there's fish.
The worst part of Onyx is now I know when I'm trespassing. Was in the old days, I wasn't 100% sure.
Yeah, you said that the other day. You're like, man, I used to fish down there all the time. I didn't know it was just that.
We fished a quarter of what I used to fish back then.
Yeah. Yeah, there's not really any excuses now to
No,
not know where the
no,
boundaries are. But yeah, it does make door knocking a little easier. At least you at least know the person on the tax assessor's, paperwork. At least you know their name.
that's true.
Can help out a little bit. Hey, so shifting gears. So what's going to happen in the North Idaho cutthroat fisheries? What's the spring forecast looking like?
Oh man, the last couple of years, everything's been a little bit on fast forward. So normally, I would say, historically speaking, we usually kind of the squala action, March Brown action, which typically happens together, is usually, I would say, around, mid-April, and then we kind of flow into the salmon fly, PMD, time, and then you kind of flow into the green drake, some of that stuff. Last year, I was a little late to the game because I was bear hunting all spring, and when I went up with my big foamy salmon flies, the third week of May to fish for the salmon flies, I discovered that that had already happened. So
Yeah, you don't want to be. That's one hatch you don't want to be late.
man, and I missed all of the squala, all the March. Honestly, I think my favorite time of the year is I really like them. As much attention as the big, and don't get me wrong, I love fishing the big foamy fly like everybody else does, but the staple on these cold freestone streams early on are the mayflies until you get to the caddis, and we don't get like we get there's some good caddis hatch. We don't get that crazy caddis hatch like that Mother's Day caddis hatch that you guys get in the central part of Washington. We have caddis that happen throughout the course of the year, but it's not really like necessarily a key event like some of these mayfly hatches. Honestly, I kind of gear my thought process around the mayflies, and then if the big bugs show up, the big bugs show up, and I'll certainly have some of those and be ready to make that adjustment. But I'm thinking with the snowpack that we have this year and the warm weather that is forecasted this year, last year's warm weather was not forecasted. I'm anticipating that some of those big bugs are gonna. I wouldn't be shocked. I haven't been up the North Fork, but I wouldn't be shocked if I was up there today if there were squallows on the water. You know, so
So you guys don't have June openers on the North
no,
Fork of the Coeur d'Alene and the St. Joe, but what
not in,
about the tributaries?
there are some tribs that have later openers, but I don't remember when it was. It used to be back when I was originally when I first my first endeavor into fly fishing. Nothing opened up. The main rivers didn't open up until Memorial Day weekend. That was always the weekend. Was Memorial Day weekend, and then the tribs were July 1st. And then
Yeah.
sometime when I was gone, in the the shiny glass boats chasing bass, they changed all that, and the main rivers and the tribs stayed open year round. So my understanding is there are some tribs that have a later opener, but as far as I'm aware of, in the main drainage that I spend most of my time because it's close to home, everything is a free for all. It's all year, all the time.
What do you anticipate for runoff in the North Idaho area this year?
Not much.
You guys are still
Not
light.
much. Now, yeah, we're super light. We did get a fairly significant snowstorm last weekend, and a lot of time, I've only been over there for 5 years, so I don't have a great frame of reference, but I have noticed over the last couple of years, some of our biggest snowfalls happen in March, and so I suppose it's feasible that everything catches up, but like, I had 10 inches of snow at my house Friday morning of last week, and it's forecasted that by Thursday of this week, the third week of March, that we're supposed to have mid 60s temps. So I don't think we're going to have the big push of the runoff. I've been there in June when the river completely flooded out. I think 3 years ago I did a guide trip on a day where we actually broke a record for flows, which was absolutely insane that we were on the water that day, but they insisted that we go. So I don't think we're gonna have the big push that we normally experience
Did you guys
this
catch
year.
fish the day you were floating in flood conditions?
No, we were just trying to stay alive. We were floating through trees. We normally have like a half-mile dirt road off road to get to the launch, and we launched our boats off of the main road and paddled our way through the timber to get to the main channel. It was the
Heck,
dumbest thing I've ever done. I've never been so terrified for a 8 to 10 hour day sitting in the middle of a drift boat. And I was fortunate. I was with two professional guides who had 10 times the experience that I had from Wyoming. And we got to a couple of places. They're like, and of course they had no idea, but they're like, because I'm an older guy, I'm 50. They were in their 30s. They're like, man, I'm glad you're on the sticks because I wouldn't want to be rowing this water. And all I could think to myself was, you have no idea how little experience I have right now compared to you guys.
So that's, dude. So you were just like floating through the timber, like, okay, the river's this way.
Joe, I will put it to you this way. When I got to the fly shop, there's a big eddy right before you get to the fly shop. I watched a porta potty come through the big eddy.
Where were you floating down to like the snake pit?
Floated from the snake pit down to Cataldo. And this was a bachelor party with a guy from Wyoming. And we took 8 boats that day. There were 16 anglers. And he'd made a deal with his buddies where they were staying at the Coeur d'Alene Resort, and they were like they were going to fish one day, play the golf course one day, and he was adamant about the fact that we tried everything we could possibly do to cancel this trip, and he would not cancel the trip. Out of 8 boats, 16 anglers, there was a single fish caught that day.
Dude, that's a great story though, man. They went and floated in flood conditions. You had a porta potty float through the
Dude,
back eddy.
I was just happy to put the boat on the trailer at the end of the day. My hands stopped shaking about the time we hit Cataldo, and I could see the ramp. I'm like, okay, I can finally relax. We would not let them we wore life jackets the entire day.
Oh, of course, yeah. And cold high water, man, that's dangerous.
Oh, it was awful. It was one of the worst experiences I've ever had on the water.
That's great. These 30-year-old dudes are like, man, I'm so glad you're on the sticks.
Yeah, and I was thinking to myself, I'm like, yeah, I've got a total of about 17 to 18 days on these sticks.
Yeah.
You guys did more of that the week before you came here. But we survived. They drank a lot of whiskey.
Yeah. A great
I
story
did
though, man.
not. And they kept trying to give me whiskey. I'm like, fellas, look, if I'm going to die today, I want to die sober.
Oh my gosh. So, but in general, I've been up on that river before, and it'll run high but quite clear. I mean, it
Oh,
seems to
yeah.
hold its color really well.
Holds its color really well. Normally, we don't have to cancel a trip based on water levels. There's always something. I mean, that was like I think we broke like a 50-year record. Seriously, it wasn't just blown out. It was like blown out and blown up. That day it was dirty. It was all the yeah no and really when it gets big like that, oftentimes the fishing can be amazing. I wouldn't, yeah, water levels would not be of much. It becomes unwadeable. But if you're in a drift boat, water levels would be of zero concern to me because the water is so clear.
Yeah, that thing holds its color.
It just said there's no mud, there's no dirt, there's not a lot of silt, there's no glacial, you know what I mean? It's like it's flowing. It's all the canyons are very steep. Now, with the burns that have happened in the last couple of years, I suppose there could be some sediment that dumps in them, but most of the time, they're blown up, but they're still running crystal clear.
Yeah, I've only fished that river once and had a great time. It's long. I mean, how many miles of the and that's great. So you wait, back to this. You guys you had eight boats in this bachelor party, which is the reason they had you as the part-time guy.
Oh,
Okay, I'll help out every now and then. Like that's the
oh
reason
yeah.
they had you as well on the party.
And they thought I was dumb enough to say yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Porta potty floating around in the back eddy.
yeah,
Cast to the left of the grabber, man.
yeah. It was, yeah, it was wild. No, the rivers are really, really long. I would say, man, I'm gonna guess here. I've never actually mapped it out, but when you get off at Kingston, if you want to drive all the way up to where to where the roadless section starts and the other big stem of the trib meet, it's an hour and a half at 45 miles an hour. It's probably 60 miles.
And
Um,
then you have the 25 miles of roadless section.
oh yeah, there's 25 miles of roadless, and then there's another stem, that goes another 20 miles, and then there's many tribs that are, yeah, I've been there 5 years, Joe, and I've fished as much as I possibly can, and I have yet to touch it all. I mean, there are still places where people say, I can't believe you haven't fished that. I'm like, dude, I got I mean, I fish as many days as I possibly, I fish more than the normal person does, and I still can't see it all. Yeah, it's impossible. There's so much to fish.
Yeah, I love those cutthroat fisheries. One of the best, obviously a slightly different river that you also fish, but yeah, I think 2 summers ago, my son Jake and my wife Kelly and I went and fished the St. Joe, and
Yeah,
we've kind of gone to a no drift boat policy on our family road trips for a couple of reasons. You can't be nearly as spontaneous, when you have a boat.
nope,
Yeah.
nope.
So we like the latitude of being able to fish. Like some days we might fish 2 or 3 rivers on our road trips. We'll go one place in the morning and check it out, and then jam over to another stream. And when you're wade fishing, it's really easy. But yeah, we fished the Joe, and that was it was one of the best. The best we've done a lot of fishing on our family road trips. That was one of the best trips we had because like my wife Kelly, who you've known for
Mm-hmm.
since we know
Was
each
this
other.
way before you were dating or before
Yeah,
you were married?
exactly.
Yeah.
20 some years. She likes fishing, but she wants just straight dry fly fishing, single dry, no hopper dropper stuff, man. She loves casting and
Cool. Yep.
simple, and she can step foot in the Joe and just be like, yeah, she can carve out her own water and do her own thing. Nobody bugging her. She fishes with her AirPods in, which is really
I
funny.
do that sometimes too.
Well, she listens to audiobooks, and she's a big
Oh,
reader, and so she just wants to be totally left alone. Like, there's a funny story I got actually. So we were fishing another desert creek that you're familiar with. It's the one with all the rattlesnakes.
mm-hmm.
And, that one's a real high stakes fishery. Tons of rattlesnakes on this creek. And
Mm-hmm.
of course, like myself and most women, most men, and most people in general, you're terrified of rattlesnakes when you're walking around in tall grass. And, she was being sporty and she's like, yeah, I'll go fish that place with you. Or she's like, oh, just help me watch for snakes. She was super easy going about it. I'm like, man, normally she sees a spider and screams. She once got held hostage by a spider in the bathroom that was blocking the exit. And yeah, she called me on the phone. I had to come home and kill the spider. But so we're fishing on this creek, and Jake, whom Jake, my younger
Yeah.
son, Jake's like, he's like rattlesnake. He's saying, and I'm like, we're hiking up a trail together to, along the creek. And he's like, hey, rattlesnake. And I'm like, oh man. And I can immediately, of course, hear it rattling. And it's about 6 feet from Kelly. And I'm like, Kelly's not even reacting. She's just standing there looking around, like, like completely distant. And Jake's like, man, that's a big rattlesnake. And we're having an entire conversation about the size of the rattler that's coiled up and rattling. And it was only then we realized that she had her AirPods in and she's listening to a book and couldn't hear the
She
rattle.
had no idea.
To this day, she has no idea about the rattlesnake.
I love it. I love it.
We played that
One of
one.
the things one of the things that Idaho does that, and I'm not a huge fan of the way governments typically, are heavy handed, but one of the things that Idaho does that is really, really cool, I think that makes it, that is a huge advantage for the recreational, weekend warrior type of fly fisherman is there are a bunch of these fisheries that they're not guidable. So like of that 60 miles or whatever there is of the North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene, the permit for the outfitter that I guide for is very short. It's the very bottom end. And so it's not to say that you won't see some drift boats on the river, but those are not guide boats. So from, the snake pit, where the South Fork dumps in down to Cataldo, that's the only place you're allowed to guide from a boat. Now there are a handful of every once in a while you will see some, there might be some walk and wade guide, type situations, but most people aren't paying for that. So that means, no guide pressure. Not to say that there isn't pressure, there's plenty of pressure, but you are not getting the flotilla of guide boats on a lot of these North Idaho rivers, which I think is pretty unique.
Yeah, I think that is really cool too. I'm not, certainly I'm a guide and outfitter, but I'm extremely conscientious the fact that guides do apply much the most direct pressure,
Mm-hmm.
on a lot of these Western fisheries. And so yeah, supremely conscientious about it. I know the South Fork of the Boise is non-guide water too, and the guys will just they love having that one refuge they can go that is not guided. So
Yeah.
yeah, man. Well, this has been good. I think we'll probably wrap her up, man. But it was yeah, it's been super great fishing with you the other day. I just always appreciate the time I could spend, and for folks listening, just go find those quirky little backyard fisheries. They don't have to be blue ribbon fisheries. They don't got to be famous. Just look at water with a bit of curiosity and
Mm.
see if you can kind of find your own, kind of your own fishery that's yours.